Matt, I'm really excited to welcome you on the podcast because you've been in the recruiting game for so long. First, you worked in the UK, and now you are for about 10 years living in Japan, right? So, would you be able to tell us a bit more about your journey because it's really impressive, especially given the scale that you reached in both regions. So why don't you tell us more about what it was like and how you grew the agency so quickly?
Okay, you're making me feel old, but yeah, 20 years in recruitment. Started out in the UK, which I think is a tough market, still is. And I work for kind of an old school recruitment business where I really learned how to, use the phone really well and all those basic recruitment skills. I'll try and keep this quite short, but I ended up starting my own business in the UK, um, which I ran for about 7 years and then sold the business. Um, didn't work for a couple of years, which was honestly probably the best 2 years of my life. And
Mhm.
then was thinking about where I wanted to go next, and I didn't actually realize that it was possible to work in Tokyo as a recruiter without speaking Japanese. I still don't really speak great Japanese. Um, and I found out it was possible. I got a job as a director at Robert Walters. I think probably many people have worked for Robert Walters over the years that are in recruitment. Um, before transitioning to being managing director of a very big Japanese company called Recruit Holdings, I was managing director of their international business. So it's the fifth largest recruitment company in the world. They own Indeed.com, Glassdoor, to name one of their many acquisitions. And I grew that business from 20 people to 230 people in 4 years. So we were making a loss when I took over, and when I left, I think in the final year our revenue was about 60 million USD. So
Wow.
yeah, pretty good, pretty quick growth. Um, because of that kind of track record, myself and Alex, who also worked for that company, we managed to attract some investment. We very luckily got some investment from Morgan Stanley to set up our own business in Tokyo, which is Cornerstone, where we are now. And yeah, we started with four people who we all knew each other, trusted each other, but with no clients, no candidates, no database, just a really good investment, which really helps. And now we are, I think, nearly 70 people with with plans to do the same. We want to scale the business to kind of over 200 people, and yeah, we're not there yet, but we're on the
Mhm.
path. That's for sure.
Mhm. Well, it's super exciting to hear these numbers. A lot of recruiters they want to start their own practice. They would like to hire their first or second colleague, and they face so
Yep.
many obstacles. And they often may also wonder, like, "Hey, how do I get some money to pay the bills?" So an investment from Morgan Stanley definitely helps. And we will probably not talk about how to get the investment because it, could not be relevant as much as your recruiting experience and how to set up the business, how to run the business, how to get the
Yep.
first clients. So why don't we kind of roll back to the year 2019, I guess, when you started this business? Like, what was it like to get the first clients on board?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've been recruiting in Tokyo for a while, so I think if you are going to set up your own recruitment company, it should initially be based on obviously your own ability, but also your own connections. I think you need to have a relatively strong network to start with, and it obviously is amazing to get your first client, to get your first deal. I think in particular is fantastic, and I think you just have to be in the mindset that you're gonna even if you like, for me, for example, I was managing, like I say, well over 200 people, wasn't recruiting. I hadn't actually recruited for about 4 or 5 years. So, but I still, maintained the client relationships. And I think I was willing to, and Alex too, we were both willing to make that step where you realize you just have to absolutely go back to basics and leverage all the connections you have in your network, do the grind. And it is a grind if you set up your own business. There's with or without investment, it's going to be a grind at the start. And you have to embrace that and have a vision as to where the company wants to go and whether you want this to be a big business or a lifestyle business, because that's going to affect every decision you make, every choice you make in terms of hiring and KPIs and all that kind of stuff. And then you got to execute. And yeah, like I say, we're still kind of not even halfway to where we want to be. So yeah,
Wow.
a lot of work to go.
Very inspiring. And you mentioned something really interesting that you are or you were not recruiting back then when you started. And it's kind of interesting often with people who join our academy or they kind of would like to transition, they look at recruiting, like how to be really good in recruiting, how to know the IT terminology, how to use the latest AI tool to source candidates on GitHub or whatnot,
Hmm.
right? But that is probably less important than the client relationships, as you mentioned, right? So what was
Yeah.
it on your end? You focused on client acquisition, right? Mostly.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, there's two steps to it. I think firstly, you need to know what you've just described, which is the technical aspect of how to be a good recruiter. And, my whole career is recruitment. I just hadn't actually been doing the day-to-day recruitment because I've been managing a big recruitment business. So, but I still had the skills um, because I got 20 years experience. Um, so yeah, I think you need that technical grounding first of all. I think that's the most important thing, and that's going to allow you to develop a network which you can leverage later. And I think it is important, but there's no, I don't think there's a magic answer to how to do business development. I think we all know that you need to develop a system which works well in the area that you're working in, and then you need to put the hours and the numbers in after that to leverage your own skills and the network that you have.
That sounds easy when you say it this way, but I
It's
also
not
saw
easy yet. Yeah.
lots of solopreneurs struggle with this. And what could be the kind of the difference between kind of making it and not making it in terms of getting the first client? Because for a lot of people, it is also kind of challenging mentally because they don't have the credibility yet because they just learned how to do recruiting and they
Yep.
often are not confident enough to pick up the phone and say like, "Hey, I'm a recruiter," because they are not yet. They would just like to be. So, what did you do in your new agency? Because also you didn't have any candidates, you didn't have any, you know, clients, nothing.
I think you need to really understand how you're going to sell your business firstly, and that's really important. So you need to understand what you're actually selling. So, if you've worked for a bit like I did, you worked for a very big business which had a big brand in Japan, quite easy to sell that because, the previous company were advertising on taxis, in trains, on TV,
Wow.
everywhere,
Hmm.
right? So it's just pretty easy to leverage that kind of brand. Everybody knows the company, they're going to listen to you. So I think we first of all have to decide what is our company and how are we going to pitch this? What gives us maybe just not even an edge, but something which at least interests somebody to continue a conversation or opens a door. So I think you need to get your pitch down perfectly, and I think you also don't need to fall into the basic traps of trying to sell on price initially. I think it's very tempting if you don't have clients to maybe think, okay, maybe we'll go in a bit cheaper and we'll try and undercut people to win quick business. Wasn't wasn't something we did. In fact, our price point was probably slightly higher than everybody else in the market, which again actually creates a point of interest. It means you have to justify it, but if someone is asking you questions to justify your fee, then you're in a position where you're actually selling the business, which you might not have been in otherwise. So I think stick to your principles, understand what you're selling and how you're going to sell it, where your price point is, um, and then you have to put the hard work in and do the numbers. That's the key.
That sounds easy. Sounds doable. Anyone could do it, but also most of the people actually fail. So
Yeah,
if we kind of flip this, and you are now in Japan, imagine you would be thrown in the middle of Poland, for example, in Warsaw, and
yeah.
you would be asked to start a new agency, focused on the technology space. How would
Yeah,
you go about establishing a new brand without the investment from Morgan Stanley? Like, what would you do in your first 30 days?
I think I'd do some research on the market firstly as to who the major players were and who I wanted to, maybe not even the major players, but try and map the market initially, which is what we did here in Tokyo. We thought we knew it pretty well, but we still wanted to properly map the market and look at you know who our competitors were recruiting for, who was advertising on LinkedIn, who was clearly looking for staff currently. looking at news articles as well to see which companies were expanding, which companies had got investment.
Mm.
There's a big company called SoftBank in Japan, which went through a massive round of investment in lots of companies, mainly tech companies. So they had a lot of money and a lot of headcount to fill initially. So I think I would formulate a strategy around that, which is really research the market, identify some key targets, approach them with some knowledge of their business, and try and leverage my own background to open the doors. And
Mm.
that would be the same whether I had investment or not. It would just mean that there were less people doing it from the start
Mm.
without the investment.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. I mean, it comes down to this grind, identifying the target
Mm.
persona, the target client. So, from your experience, who is the target to connect with? Just to give you some context, often we kind of target the head of HR or the CTO in our technology space.
Yeah.
Would you say it's enough to connect with one person and hope they respond, or would you rather suggest to connect with three, four, five people from the same company? Like, what do you do in your case?
Yep. So we definitely recommend the second choice. So
Mhm.
we train our guys to start from the top and work their way down, basically. And I
Mhm.
think you should be contacting multiple people in the business. If you're just relying on one contact, they could really block you or be a gatekeeper. So I think the classic rule in recruitment is, I know it sounds counterintuitive to maybe people who have less experience, but HR is usually not the best person to speak to. So they would be close to the bottom of our list. It may be that you eventually get funneled down to them, but you've already agreed that you're going to work with a client, and kind of HR are then forced into a situation where maybe they have to deal with a new agency. So for us, yeah, as many contacts as possible, starting from the president and working down. I mean, if you're in IT, I would still start with the president before I call the CTO. Honestly,
Mhm.
um, and yeah, I'd absolutely recommend to call multiple contacts within the same client. You get different bits of information from everybody, which eventually you can put together and use to hopefully help you win the business. But yeah, HR will be close to the bottom of my list.
Yeah, that's also kind of my experience. Usually, they are the gatekeepers, not really
Yeah,
wanting to work with us in recruiting, unless the CTO says like, "Hey, really need the people, go
yeah.
work with." Interesting dynamics indeed. Okay, and how it actually works in Japan? Because with my limited understanding of the market in Japan, people are usually not very open to kind of foreigners, especially kind of in your case, you are the expat living in Japan,
Mm.
right? So how do you actually get your foot in the door?
So there are two distinctive markets in Japan. Which is it's quite different from other countries. So you have the local domestic market, which is Japanese language only, Japanese companies. We don't really touch that market. So that is dominated by huge Japanese recruitment companies. That it's not. I wouldn't even really call it recruitment. It's kind of a very different customer service led approach which they have to the domestic market. Then you have the international market, which is the market we operate in, which is international companies that have an office in Tokyo, or actually internationally minded Japanese companies where they're looking to expand overseas and they have English speakers in the business. And in that market, we typically, what most people want to hire is a bilingual Japanese person, right? So someone who can speak native Japanese and business level English. And there aren't that many Japanese people that actually speak business level English to start with. So that creates quite a nice scenario in Tokyo, where the fees we charge 40%, which is you know significantly higher, right, than what you're gonna find in other markets, because the product we're selling is in very short supply. Um, the other kind of beauty of the market in Tokyo is that LinkedIn is not particularly widespread, so people don't really use it. And only a very small percentage of Japanese professionals are actually active on LinkedIn. And Japanese people tend not to apply to job adverts. So what it means is that even the very best brands in the world, the biggest companies, actually find it really difficult to source staff themselves. So as a recruiter, your position is elevated a little bit in this market. They really need us. We can operate on a level, and so I think from the client side, that makes it a little bit easier. The tech market in Tokyo is particularly interesting. It's the one market where technical ability is actually more important than Japanese language ability. So in all other job functions that we cover, we really have to place, like I say, bilingual Japanese people. But the tech market is quite interesting in that companies will hire overseas talent, um, because actually the level of ability within IT in Japan is a lot lower than you're going to find in India or Southeast Asia or the US. So actually, the professionals we can bring in tech can really add some value from that perspective. So it's a really nice area. I mean, last year was a bit tough, but right now the tech market is kind of bouncing back a bit, and it's good. It's the one area where we can place kind of foreign talent.
Wow. Well, for 40%, that this sounds like dream coming true. Awesome.
Yes, it's pretty good.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. So, if I kind of stick with the technology market, there are usually two types of the services. One is the consulting service, where
Yep,
companies, recruiting agencies, or even consulting companies, they offer consulting service, as in, let's say, DevOps consulting, or they find an engineer and then outstaff the person on a 3
yep,
or 6 month contract. And the other is the recruiting service for the one-time payment, the contingent or retaining. So, what would you suggest to focus on or to start with? Because both have some pros and cons on the cash flow, and clients may be more inclined towards one or the other. So, what are your
mhm,
thoughts on these differences, and how do you see it?
yep. I think it's a really good question. When we started on the kind of the permanent placement side, so developing those client relationships, making one-off placements, or multiple placements, but on a permanent level. We just actually opened our staffing business to place temporary IT staff. Actually, I think it's a pretty lucrative market, especially in IT. The margins are very big here for kind of project managers, especially in some of the big insurance companies, financial services businesses. So we can, I think as a candidate, you can actually make more money in that area. But for us, I think there's some difficulties around getting the license in Tokyo, which you might not experience in other areas. So I think it was easier for us just in this market to start with the permanent side, develop those relationships, and then you really lock down the client if you can also provide the temporary staffing side of it, because then they can come to you for all their needs, right? So I think eventually I would recommend doing both.
Mhm.
Um, Whatever you're strongest in, I think wherever your experience is, we were just more permanent recruitment guys who have branched out into kind of the staffing element. But if your experience and your expertise is in staffing and you have the relationships there, especially with candidates, then you should start there. I think the only issue, which you quite rightly mentioned, is cash flow on that side. But I think there are plenty of solutions, some financial solutions which you can find some invoice factoring to make sure that somebody's going to pay that on your behalf and take a little cut of the fee before you really get the cash flow to a level where you can just do it all yourself.
Well, that's the better problem to have, right?
Yeah,
You have
yeah, yeah.
the nuances factor. Awesome. And you just mentioned the relationships with candidates on your website. You feature the number of candidates in the talent pool or database. Like I recall, it's either 50 or 500,000, probably
Mm,
500,000. So
yep,
how do you even build this database? I mean, 500,000, that's a lot, especially if these are in Japan. So
yep.
how do you go from no candidates in 2019 to having 500,000 people in your database just 5 years later?
Yeah, so we it, it's a grind, obviously, but you need some other tools to generate that level of candidates. So we certainly in the Japan market, it's quite popular to outsource some candidate sourcing to third parties. So
Mhm.
you can have businesses in the Philippines, in India, which can, we partner with a business that are based in the Philippines who will generate a significant number of candidates for us.
Mhm.
Um, and in fact, a lot of the recruitment companies in Tokyo will open their own candidate sourcing center in a low labor cost market like the Philippines or India, and that can really help you with the volume side of it. our goal was to build a database first, so that we can, when a client has a need, we don't actually need to actively specifically source for that job. We can do a search on the database, find the candidates, quickly get them into play, and close the deal. So I think we used a lot of different methods, a lot of advertising, when you have a little bit of investment to start with,
Mhm.
you can invest a bit more in that. Um, so yeah, a mix of all those three.
Nice, very nice. And is there any strategy that you would recommend in this matter? For example, to focus on one role or one segment, one industry? Like, how do you go about deciding what segment to actually build a database in?
So I think it depends which country you're operating in. So I think if I was doing this in the UK, I think the market is more suited towards kind of a niche specialism. It's a little bit more difficult to get jobs in England than it is in Japan. And I think what's going to make the client in the UK more interested is that you are a real niche specialist in their area, and you can actually help them with that need, and you're an expert. So I think if I was doing it again in England, it would be focused more on one niche, and then I might try and develop another niche and another niche. And you see a lot of companies, someone like S3, who've made a huge business out of developing specific brands in each area, right? I think in the Tokyo market, it's a little bit different because there are so many vacancies in all the companies, and there's this shortage of candidates. So from the client perspective, what they really want is they'd rather deal with an agency that can help them across the board fill all their positions, rather than dealing with 10 different agencies, each with their own specialist niche, because then it's a one-stop shop and they're happier. So in Japan, it's a slightly different approach. So yeah, it depends where you are, I think, is the
Mhm.
answer to that question. You've got to know your market, and your strategy has to fit that market.
That's very interesting regarding the niche, because that's something often people kind of underestimate, and they
Mm,
also want to focus on fintech and also on IT and also on medical, all at
yeah.
once, just one person. But what do you kind of suggest is to focus on one very specific niche? It could be one role probably, or one segment of small. If
Yeah, I
you,
think maybe one role might be a little bit too niche, like one specific. If you focus just on cybersecurity, maybe it's just well, that's what an area, I guess, but it's still a little bit too niche to start with. I mean, I think again in this market, our strategy is we're going to start broad, and then we're going to focus. So to give you an idea, in the previous company, just talking IT specifically, I think when I started, I had about 5 recruiters recruiting generally across the IT space,
Mhm.
right? And then when I left, I had 70 recruiters, 70, focusing in tech, each with we had a gaming team, a cybersecurity team, lots of different teams,
Mhm.
which was then focused on that area, just generating candidates in their own area. And yeah, I think that's just for this market, that's the way we do it. We start broad, helps you build a little bit of a broader database to make some of those searches a little bit easier later when you do expand, and
Mhm.
then we'll narrow down to give people career opportunities within those niches and
Mhm.
within those different teams.
Mhm. And regarding this database now, what would you say is some meaningful number to have in order to be interesting for clients as a kind of door opener? Just I'm kind of thinking, if you go to a prospective client and say like, "Hey, I have a database of 25 people," it may not be enough, but 500,000 is a bit too many, right? To kind of digest without any investment. So where is the threshold that you would recommend?
So I mean, I don't think I would be mentioning that to a client. Is the honest answer, until I got to a point where it was worth mentioning. So if I've got a database of 30 people, then there's no way I'm going to be advertised. That's not a selling point, right? You're going to be selling on something different, which is your individual expertise, the fact that the client can trust you to really work hard and fill this position. You're an expert in that area. So I think, you want to build as big a database as possible. I think that goes without saying in your area. But yeah, I think it's quite rare. I don't know, maybe you disagree, but in my experience, it's actually quite rare for a client to ask you,
Mhm.
how big is your database? It doesn't happen that often.
Mm.
Um, And I think if they do ask you, then and you've got a small database, you need to answer it more in the way of, listen, the size of the database doesn't matter. It's my ability to find the right people for you and actually do the job and get it done. And if you have a big database, then maybe you give them the number, and
Mhm.
that's how you do it. So yeah, no, so it wouldn't be something I would. It's not really a selling point unless it gets to a certain size. And even now, honestly, we don't sell on the size of our database because there are companies out there in our market that have a database of several million candidates. So
Everything is relative, isn't it?
it's all relative. Yeah.
Awesome. And with the crazy growth, also the team size increases. So now you have on your team dozens of people. Do they specialize in certain areas? Would you recommend that individual recruiters focus on certain area or certain niche, or would you rather have them work across different segments just so they can replace one and the other if one person leaves?
Yeah, I think, like I say, it depends on the. We're not at the size yet where we're really super niche and super specialized, and I think we're just starting to break the teams, especially in IT, into some slightly broader areas, which is going to help with candidate generation and actually, like I say, provide career opportunities so that you can eventually have, as we do, several managers managing different areas. I think that's important to really keep people engaged in the business. If you just have one big general team, the career opportunities are less. But IT in particular, I think, is an area which eventually you're going to need to specialize in. But then if you compare that to something like some of the back office areas we cover, like finance and accounting or HR, if you're an accountant, you can pretty much work in any industry. You could work in a luxury company, you could work in an IT company. There's some slight differences, but generally, yeah, that's a little bit more difficult to specialize in, and it's better to be a little bit more generalist, I think. So it depends on the area, but yeah, we're working towards continual specialization in some sectors.
Nice, nice. And now the kind of if we take a step further, I'm wondering also what it is like to work in Japan versus working in the UK, because in the past you've been leading the business in the UK. Now you are in Japan. So would you be able to compare what is like to work with candidates and clients? There are certain cultural differences. So what it is like?
I mean, there's loads of cultural differences. I was really shocked when I first came to Tokyo because I think in certainly in the UK, the candidate side is a little bit easier, especially when you're getting feedback from candidates. They tend to be a lot more transparent about whether you call somebody after an interview and the candidate will be quite honest with you usually. I loved it. I hated it. I could work for that guy. I would never work for her. It's just, they'll give you an honest impression.
Hmm.
And I remember, when I first came to Japan, Japanese people are really reticent to tell you exactly what they're feeling. So it can be really difficult. You can call a candidate and say, "Hey, how was the interview?" And they'll say, "It was fine."
Hmm.
Yeah, but did you like it? How do you feel about it? And they'll say, "Yeah, it was fine." How does it compare to your other opportunities? Yeah, I think they're all okay. Yeah, and it's tough. So it took me a while when I first started doing it in Tokyo, I was thinking, how am I ever going to find out what anybody is thinking? And of course, you adapt to the cultural situation, um, and you can eventually kind of figure things out. I think that the market is much slower here. So on the client side, there is, I think culturally in Japan, decision making needs a consensus. So it's very rare that somebody, even the CEO, will take the lead and say, okay, we're going to do it this way. I've decided we're going to hire this girl or this guy. Usually, there'll be 7 or 8 interviews. Everybody kind of has to agree, and then maybe you might get the deal through. Jobs can stay open 6 months, a year, sometimes. So the perks are the 40% and the easier client relationships, but the downside is the market is much slower. Um, and you really have to navigate those cultural differences. I think when we're dealing with candidates, the reliability of candidates on the flip side is much higher in Japan. So if you just compare the drop off rate, like even just attending interviews. The drop-off rate in Japan is nearly zero. If somebody commits to an interview, they're going to go to it. It's going to be a little lower than that in the UK, depending on how good you are. And when a candidate signs an offer in Japan, that it's done. They're
Mm.
gonna stick to it. So you very rarely get backouts, refunds, free replacements. A little bit rarer in Japan. People will tend to stick out new
Mm.
jobs even if they don't like it. So yeah, some very different market, in some pros, some cons, but very different.
Well, you enumerated most of the pros, candidate sticking. I just kind of had flashbacks with some of our candidates withdrawing offers at the last minute or
Yeah,
not coming to their job on the first day. It's just so different, especially in the technology space.
yeah. Well, I remember in England, I had like I said, I had my own business in England, and I remember one day. This maybe reflects badly on me, but I remember one day I had an in-house interview, which is I think what you should always aim for if you can, where client was coming to the office. I'd lined up I think 6 people for him to interview. And I'd chosen the candidates. It wasn't like I was sending CVs and he was choosing. He trusted me. I lined up the candidates. He's going to meet all of them. Best way to fill a job if you can. And I had one day when nobody turned up.
No,
All
really?
6, all 6.
I-
And the guy was in the office for 4 hours. 4 hours of hell for me because one after the other didn't turn up. And I'd done everything right. I'd done the checks, I'd sent them the email, I'd called them the night before, we'd spoken. Nobody turned up. So
Wow.
yeah, and that's never happened in Japan. That's for sure.
Wow, wow, that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it
Um,
was tough.
what kind of challenges do you expect going forward now? Like you have experience, you've done it before, you have a team of experts. So a lot of people may be wondering, okay, now it's so easy for him. But what do you envision as some kind of challenges in the next 6 months or 2 years?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I think once you get a business to 50 people, in my experience, then that's the real first challenge. Um, and the kind of the culture is kind of set at that point. So I think once you've really got the culture set and you're happy with the first 50 that you have in the business, I think hiring. I know it sounds ridiculous because we are recruiters, but hiring is the biggest challenge. We especially for someone like us. So if you want to scale a bit business, if you want a lifestyle business or you want a smaller boutique agency, I think you can focus on hiring experienced recruiters and you can pick the right people and hopefully attract them to join your business. If you want to scale a business to 250 people, which in one office, which we want to do, then we're going to hire 80% of people like we do who do not have any recruitment experience, and we're
Mm.
going to train them in our methodology and our style. So I think it's really important for us that we get a system because it's quite difficult to assess people without experience. So you really have to nail that system and really hire the right people. You've got to train them extremely well, and make them feel like they are invested in and taken care of, and hopefully they can taste some success early so that they fall in love with recruitment, rather than falling out of love with recruitment, which can also happen. So I think that's the challenge, is really just finding the right people, getting the right people for the company, really understanding what your culture is and who's going to do well in that culture. And I think we really learned that, certainly for the last 3 businesses that I've worked for, the type of person you hire is very different because the culture of those businesses was very different. And somebody who may have done well in company A actually probably wouldn't do as well in Cornerstone now, right? So I think it's really having a really good understanding of what the culture of your business really is, because you're going to set it to a certain degree, but to a certain degree, it has a life of its own as well with the people that you hire and who's gonna really thrive in that kind of environment.
Mm, mm. Well, some people even start hating not sales, but recruiting.
Yeah, they do.
Fall in love with it, but some start disliking it because of the constant rejection. Candidates are not picking up the phones, they withdraw offers, clients are not responding.
Yeah.
So how do you help your team members manage this negativity in this?
Yeah, I think most people well, not most people, a lot of people, I think you're right. I think they get frustrated around the unpredictability of recruitment, right? And I think especially when there's a lot on the line, if you could have a promotion, a big commission check based on somebody starting a job and you've done everything right. You've
Mm.
done all the checks, and then that person the day before, sends you an email and says, "Hey, I'm not starting," and that can be really demoralizing, and I think very difficult to handle. But I think what I say to all my guys is, I think the unpredictability, I think, is actually predictable once you really look at it from a kind of a macro viewpoint. What you can control is your own technical ability and how hard you work. And if you do everything correct in a deal, that's actually all you can do. Now, over the course of a year, you're gonna have 3 or 4 situations which completely surprise you, even when you've done everything right. And I think I like to get my guys in the mindset of when that happens, when that big disappointment happens, which they weren't expecting. Well, that's one of the 4 big disappointments done for the year. There's probably going to be another 3, but that's one out of the way. And if you get 2 in a row, well, that's 2 out the way, and you probably only get 2 more later in the year. So I think once you get in that mindset that it is going to happen, it is predictable that you will get some unpredictable results. Sometimes that helps. That helps a little bit, and also just I think if you have a business where people can see the success of others and they can measure themselves a little bit against the other people in the business and have that mindset of, well, if she can do it, then I can do it, or if he can do it, then I can do it. Then that also helps.
Hmm. Well, these are great tips. I'll use this reframing as well for myself.
Good.
And you also mentioned that you would like to collect, or not collect, but have these colleagues working in one office. So how do you handle the trend towards working from home versus your desire to keep everyone working from the same office?
So we've changed a little bit our strategy. So when we first started the business, we were 100% office based, and I actually think that was one of the reasons why we were successful to start with, because especially without boasting, myself and Alex, we've got a lot of experience. So if you're one of the first people that join our business and you don't have experience and you get to sit in a room with guys that have been doing this for 20 years, well, what a fantastic opportunity to learn and listen to us on the phone. So I think we've changed it a bit now. We're kind of hybrid now, so people can work 2 days at home and 3 in the office. I think we'll never go any further than that, specifically because we hire inexperienced people, and if you are an inexperienced recruiter, you're going to learn from your peers, from your teammates. That's how you're going to succeed. And if you really want to have a good career in recruitment, and remote working is your number one priority as an associate consultant, I think you've got the wrong priorities. Honestly, I don't think that's how it should be. So I think for us, it makes a big difference. I think conversely, if you are running a business where everybody's experienced and they know what they're doing, then yeah, maybe you're going to give them way more flexibility. But for a business where everybody's relatively junior, um, and a little bit younger, I actually think people enjoy the camaraderie as well at that age of being in the
Mhm.
office, socializing, making friends, especially in another country where most of we've got 19 different nationalities in our business. So a lot of people, you know, they're their friends are their friends that they work with because they work with them in the office, have a drink after work, see each other every day or 3 days a week now, and yeah, it makes a big difference, and people can learn and see people popping deals, and yeah, it's been a big part of our success. And I think, especially during COVID, because we kicked off the business just before COVID, and it's a terrible time in theory to launch a new business, and all our competitors, there were no official work from home rules in Japan. Japan was a bit different from the rest of the world, but all our competitors sent everybody home, and we were in the office grinding. And I actually think that gave us a bit of an edge. The competition dropped off a bit as people were starting to get used to how to work from home. So I
Mm.
actually think COVID was a good thing for our business at the start because of that.
Very interesting. Well, at least something positive out of it, right?
Mm.
When your colleagues are at the office, do they call from their seats? Like, do you have some open space where people sit next to each other? Because this way they would learn from each other, but they could also disturb each other. Or do you have for them those phone booths, as they are often called?
So we've got a big office in center of Tokyo, right? So I think our office can seat over 100 people, right? 120 people, something like that. So we haven't filled it yet. So there's plenty of space in the office. We like people to sit in their teams. Yes, we do have there is some casual areas and some free space, but generally we encourage the teams to be together. I think you can help each other a lot, and you can listen to people screening a candidate. You might get an idea for a job which you want to pitch. So yeah, I think I like that aspect of we're a team, we're in it together. We share candidates. We don't have candidate ownership in our business, so there's a lot of teamwork, very teamwork focused culture. So yeah, we a little bit old school, but we yeah they sit in their teams and hit the phone.
Well, that must be a very inspiring environment also for others to see how one screens a candidate and how they
Yeah,
close the deal.
exactly.
Pretty cool. Well, I could listen to you for another hour or so, but I guess also you have some other appointments coming up
Hmm.
soon. Maybe we could set another podcast session in 6 months or 12 months, just to kind
Perfect.
of recap on some of the topics. But before we go, is there any kind of last advice that you would like to give to fellow recruiters who are not as far in their recruiting game as you are? That they are rather at the beginning, aiming to get their second, third client.
Mm.
What would you suggest they do or not
I
do?
think I think what wor- I you know when I really remember when in my first few months as a recruiter, I can remember it very clearly, and I wasn't a natural to start with, and I remember what made a difference for me was I realized that I know this may sound a bit cheesy, but it really worked for me. So I think every day as a salesperson or as a recruiter, you've got a lot of choices to make, and there's usually an easy choice and there's usually a difficult choice. And maybe the easy choice is, maybe you've got to speak to a client who's not happy with you. And the easy choice is you send them an email, and the difficult choice is you pick up the phone and you have a conversation, you meet it head on. And I just think it's so simple, but I think over the course of the day, if you force yourself always to take the difficult choice, which is the best choice in every little situation, you'll definitely be successful. And I still use that today because you always have the voice where you think, oh, what
Mm,
should I do here? Should I do this? Oh, I really want to do this, but actually, I have to do this. And if you make that difficult choice every day with all the little choices you have, you'll be on the right track.
yeah, well, it's a great advice, and we have this little devil here, right? The smartphone, which
That's it. Yep.
it prompts us to go for the easy choice, just to scroll
Hmm.
the feed if we don't feel right. But making the hard choice, that's the hard thing. But in the long run, it pays off. Very, very
Definitely.
interesting. Cool.
Definitely.
Great. Where can people connect with you if they would like to learn more from your experience and maybe read some articles or posts on LinkedIn, probably?
Yeah, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is fine. We have a YouTube channel, Cornerstone Recruitment Japan. Not as many subscribers as you. We only have 10,000 subscribers, but we're working on it. So YouTube channel is a good place to see us. LinkedIn is fine. So yeah, check us
Awesome.
out.
I will link these in the description.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Well, thanks for joining. It was very nice learning from your experience and speaking with you. So I hope we will catch up soon again.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day.